It is live learning session time. So let's get this party started. Welcome everybody to actually the last live learning session of the semester as far as new content is concerned, not the last session. I'll continue to have sessions all the way through the end of the semester. This is the last night of new content, I hope, if I get through everything I want to get through. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and shut off my video to save that bandwidth and get this thing started. So the last unit here is the it's the MRG unit, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about natural monopolies, and we're going to talk about equity in this unit. So let me go ahead and get started here at this so you can see what's going on here. So finish line is ahead, hang in there, keep on going. If you're watching this video here and you're getting to this unit, just keep on trucking, you're almost there. So I actually did this earlier in the semester, but I'm going to do it again because natural monopolies is actually in the last unit. I always cover it in the unit when I cover monopolies because it's an easy transition there. But the idea is that when you have a monopoly is one where there's one buyer, one seller in a market. They're price makers. They have that downward slope demand curve and MR that falls at a faster rate, right? A natural monopoly, and what's going to happen with a regular monopoly is that demand curve is going to intersect to the right of the minimum of the ATC. Remember, our MC always goes through the minimum. And the demand curve is going to intersect to the right of that minimum. That's how we know this is a monopoly. When you're drawing it, if you say draw monopoly, this is what they're looking for. If they say draw a natural monopoly, what they're looking for is they're looking for a situation where the demand curve intersects to the left of the minimum of the ATC. And the reason why that is because a natural monopoly is one where the costs of production are so high that the average total cost curve is actually very, 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 very high. And you can only have one firm in there because of those very, very, very high costs. Now, what the College Board says a natural monopoly is one where long-run economies of scale for a single firm exist throughout the entire effective demand for its product. Okay, so what we do here for a natural monopoly is we actually call this the long-run average total cost curve. On the AP exam, if you draw it as an ATC curve, or on the GAVS stuff, if you just call it ATC, you're fine. But technically, it's the long-run average total cost curve. And so what's happening is we're experiencing economies of scale, which means that long-run average total cost curve is going down. That's the economies of scale through the entire effective range of the demand curve. Well, where does the demand curve no longer become effective? It no longer becomes effective when MR hits zero. And the reason why it no longer becomes effective when MR hits zero is because no firm would ever produce there, because all firms produce where MR is equal to MC, and you can't have a negative MC. So what you see here is throughout this entire range, everywhere above this, the demand curve, everywhere it hit to this, I'll do it in a different color up here, everywhere this demand curve is red, that's the effective range of the demand curve. And notice that you've got economies of scale existing through that entire range. Over here on the one on the left, the monopoly, the effective range is actually way over here. So the effective range is of the demand curve is from here all the way down to here. And notice that what you've got is economies of scale to a point, and then you start to get diseconomies of scale. And so you got diseconomies of scale in this range of the demand curve. That's a monopoly. Okay. Natural monopoly in the entire effective range, this entire red area, you've got the long-run average total cost curve going down, which means you're getting economies of scale. So if they were to ask it on the AP exam, how do you know it's a natural monopoly? The best thing to do is to regurgitate this back to them because long-run economies of scale exist throughout the entire effective range. And if you say that, you're going to get full credit. If you can't remember that, you can actually say demand curve intersects to the left of the minimum ATC, which is where economies of scale is occurring. So you need to make sure you refer back to economies of scale and where the demand curve intersects. So there you go. That's a natural monopoly. Now, once you've got your natural monopoly, just like a monopoly that we learned earlier in the year, you should be able to come in and find price, total revenue, total cost, economic profit, consumer surplus, producer surplus, deadweight loss, allocated efficient quantity, and be able to talk about whether or not it's elastic or inelastic, right? Well, obviously, I'm not going to go through all of this. You should be able to do this. If you learn the monopoly stuff way back then, you should be able to do this. Just real quick. Well, I'll kind of run through it real quick. Okay. All firms produce where MR equals MC. That gives us our quantity. Price comes from the demand curve. So you go up to the demand curve to get that. Total revenue is P times Q. So this whole big area right here is total revenue. Total cost is ATC times Q. So total cost is at that quantity where it hits the ATC. So there's your total cost right there. And again, you may need to stop, pause, and rewind to watch this. If you're like, wait a minute, I can't keep up. Stop, pause, rewind, and make sure you're getting these concepts, okay? Economic profit is the distance between price and ATC. So economic profit is going to be this area right here. It's everything between price and ATC. We can shade that in if it's asked. It's at that quantity where you hit the ATC and then you go up to price, and that distance is the profit per unit multiplied times Q, and you get the total economic profit. Consumer surplus is everything above price to the demand curve. So there's your consumer surplus there. Producer surplus. Now this one we can't really show very accurately on this because we have we don't have a straight line marginal cost curve, but I guess if we we're going to draw it, it would be here, and then you'd kind of consider it. So it'd be this area in here. This is a funky one. I really doubt they're going to ask that on the AP exam unless they give you a straight marginal cost curve with no hook on it. And I did one of those when I taught the monopoly section earlier this semester there. Deadweight loss. Well, if this were a perfect competitor, it would produce right here where price equals marginal cost, the allocated efficient point. Okay, that would be the quantity that the perfect competitor would produce. And so the deadweight loss is this region right here, right? That's your deadweight loss, that triangle right there. Always go from where you are, Q, to where you want to be, Q, PC, and that's the direction it points, and that gives you your deadweight loss. Okay, what else? Okay, allocated efficient. Well, I just showed that. Allocated efficient point is where price equals marginal cost. So it would be right here. So allocated efficient quantity would be right there. We'll call that QSO for Q socially optimal. And then the last thing is elasticity. Okay, basically they can ask, give you a point and say, is it elastic or inelastic? And what you need to know and remember is that everything to the left of when MR is equal to 0. So everything to the left of this point right here is elastic. So this whole green area is elastic. And that point right there is the unitary elastic point. And then everything to the right is inelastic. Okay, so if they said anything about a price up here, it'd be elastic. A price down here, it'd be inelastic. You can't just say to it's the left part of the curve or the right part of the curve or the higher part of the curve. You have to refer back to MR equals 0 to be able to do elasticity, unless they give you numbers actually calculated. But MR is equal to 0 tells you the unitary elastic point. Everything to the left is elastic. Everything to the right is inelastic. So that's a natural monopoly. One thing we look at is, since natural monopolies exist, this would be your electric company, the train system in Europe is a natural monopoly. The post office is a natural monopoly. MARTA in Atlanta is a natural monopoly. Usually transit systems are natural monopolies because you can only have one. It costs so much to run those things. Like the electric company, it costs so much to generate electricity that you can only have one electric company in a region. So wherever you live, you only can get electricity from one place. And so what happens is the government then comes in and regulates them. And there's a couple of points that they could regulate them at. And what they do is they regulate them by price, not by quantity, because demand curves are shifting all the time. So they regulate them at price. You'll hear it all the time in the news, not all the time, but occasionally in the news. The post office is asking the government permission to raise the price of stamps. The reason why they're doing that is because the government has regulated monopolies at a specific price per stamp, and they need to raise the price because of times are changing, their costs are changing, and things like that. And there's a couple of places that we can regulate. Okay, the first is the socially optimal. Socially optimal is just a fancy way of saying allocated efficient. Okay, they're interchangeable. Socially optimal and allocated efficient are interchangeable. Socially optimal is what society wants. Allocated efficient is what is the most economically efficient way. Bottom line, it's where price equals marginal cost. So what they would do is they would regulate them right here at this price. They would basically put in a price ceiling and say you cannot charge above that price. So what they end up doing then this marginal revenue basically ceases to exist, and they would then go out to this quantity right here. And this is the socially optimal quantity. So that would be a how they could regulate a socially optimal. So if they did that, it's going to force them to produce out here. And notice deadweight loss exists, disappears. Okay. Notice that deadweight loss disappears when we go out to the social optimal point. Okay. But there's a problem with this. Take a look at this. If we regulate them at this price, this firm is now earning an economic loss because price at that quantity, price is below. Something else just popped my screen. You didn't see it. Sorry, it's just the map, infant board. At that quantity, price is here, but your ATC is actually way up here. The average total cost of producing is way up here. So this firm would now be earning an economic loss. Well, you can't force a firm to continue to earn an economic loss. They still have to pay their bills. They have to pay their bills in the long run. The electric company, MARTA, the post office, they have to be able to pay their bills, right? And so if the government were to regulate them at the socially optimal point or the allocated efficient point, QSO, right here where price equals marginal cost, then they would have to subsidize them, okay? And their choices, they can either give them a per unit subsidy or a lump sum subsidy. And you need to know this, we've already covered this again in this course previously, but it comes up again, is that lump sum taxes and lump sum subsidies. So you just give the firm a lump sum of money. Here you go, or a lump sum tax, you would take away a lump sum of money away from them. It does not affect the marginal cost or the marginal revenue curves or marginal benefit curves. Okay, it only affects fixed costs. So in this case right here, it would only move this guy right here. Okay, so if you gave them a lump sum subsidy, then this average total cost curve would shift down, right? And that's what we want. We actually want to eliminate the loss. So we give them a subsidy, causing this ATC curve to shift down. And if you shifted it down like this, if you shift it down like this, so here's your ATC1. So it's now here at that point, then you eliminate loss. And so that's what the government would do. If you had this situation here, the government would give them a lump sum subsidy, right? Now, why not a per unit? Because a per unit is giving them money for each unit they produce, and that moves the marginal cost curve. And it actually marginal revenue curve too. But so you would never do a per unit subsidy because that affects the marginal cost curve. Instead, you would give them a lump sum subsidy. Okay. Now, second point that we could regulate monopolies is what we call a fair return. Okay, fair return is the same thing as zero economic profit. So now they're going to earn zero economic profit. Where's that point? Well, we still are bound by this demand curve. Okay, you can't regulate a firm off of their demand curve because that's what we're buying from them, right? And you can't manipulate the demand curve. You can't change our demand for stamps. Now, maybe the government could come in there and try to shift demand curves and all that, but that's not what they do. Instead, they regulate the monopoly. And where they could regulate them here is where price equals ATC, where price equals ATC. And if they put that floor, so that price ceiling right there, put that price ceiling right there, then what they're going to do is they're going to keep the price from rising. And this is where the quantity they're going to produce. Okay. And it has nothing to do with them, or equals some go that way. So this would be the Q fair return. Now, here they're earning zero economic profit, which means they're earning as much here as they would in a perfect competitive situation, but there's still deadweight loss. So it does not eliminate deadweight loss. Notice that when we did the socially optimal point, you went to price equals marginal cost. So the advantage of this one is there's no deadweight loss, and that's huge. Okay, Where this one here, regulate them at a fair return, you still have deadweight loss. It's less than it would have been. The deadweight loss before would have been way out here. So the green area would have been the deadweight loss, and now it's just the black triangle is the deadweight loss. So anyways, two different places that you can regulate a monopolist. You can regulate it at a socio-optimal, or oops, wrong way. You can regulate the socio-optimal, or you can regulate that at a fair return. All right, that's natural monopolies. Pretty simple. Okay, now we're going to go into actually one of my favorite things to teach. It's a concept that's called externalities. All right, and the idea, and basically all semester long, we've been talking to you, and we've talked about how perfect markets are. And what we're going to find out right now is that, in fact, markets aren't really perfect. A lot of the stuff that I've been teaching you all along about perfect competition, it isn't really perfect because we're going to have these things called externalities. The EK, essential knowledge that the Caldwell wants you to know, is the market equilibrium quantity is equal to the socially optimal quantity only when all social benefits and costs are internalized by individuals in the market. In other words, when there's nobody, a third party is not ever affected. Okay. And then you're going to have economic surplus is going to be what we call maximized. Now, there's a lot of economic terms here that you're probably looking at and going, what the heck is he saying? Okay, well, we'll come back to this in just a second. Okay. Bottom line is this. We actually, way back in the earlier units, we talked about marginal benefit equal to marginal cost. The additional benefit of whatever you're doing should be equal to the additional cost. Should I study for another hour? Well, the extra hour is the additional cost. The additional benefit is the higher grade. And you stop when marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. We said later on, we said that marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, right? And then we did marginal revenue product is equal to marginal factor cost. And we kept on kind of playing with this same formula here. And what we're doing is the exact same thing here. The difference is that this top one, this marginal benefit equals marginal cost, actually only had to do with your marginal benefit and your marginal cost. Okay, how much additional benefit are you going to get from the additional time you say spend studying? Okay, well, what if you're studying and you got the light on and it's bothering other people in your house? Okay, well, there actually should be thought of in this equation. Should you keep on studying if the light from you studying is bothering them, right? So what we want to do is we actually don't want to equate markets to just you individually. We want to bring in society, okay? So we're only at the socially optimal when the social benefits and costs are internalized by the individuals in the market. In other words, when you have to accept that cost too. And the bottom line is instead of going marginal benefit equals marginal cost, we're going to go to marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost. And that's the idea behind an externality. Okay. Now, when you're studying, you say, I don't care about those other people. I only care about me. And that's the idea here is that rational agents, anybody that's smart or is going to make their optimal decision by equating their private marginal benefit. And we're going to go ahead and put private marginal benefit to their private marginal cost. In other words, they don't care about society. They only care about themselves. So in economics, what we actually do is we call it marginal private benefit and marginal private cost. And when you're there, then this market is actually in equilibrium for that individual. So right here, let's take whatever product this is, upward slope of supply, downward slope of demand. This is the marginal private cost. It's the cost for the company, and the company doesn't care about anybody else. This is the marginal private benefit. This is the cost for the consumer, and they don't care about anybody else. And when they are equal, then this market is in equilibrium. That's what we've done up to this entire point. But now we're learning that, wait a minute, that isn't really the best place to go because we have to take into account externalities. Now, let me stop right here and say this. Do not talk about externalities and bring externalities into the question unless it's very clear that they're talking about it being an externality. They'd say something like somebody else is being hurt or somebody else is being helped or there's a cost borne by somebody. It will be very, very, very obvious when an externality question. So when it is, you need to make sure that you bring in the externality. Okay, so how do externalities work? Okay, an externality occurs whenever either the production of something or the consumption of something. We're actually going to have 4 different types of externalities. We'll come back to this in a little bit here. Either hurts someone, a third party, or it helps a third party. So we can either have a a negative because it hurts production externality, a negative consumption externality, a positive because it helps a third party production externality, or a positive consumption externality. So there's 4 of them. You're going to be able to know all 4 of them and be able to graph all 4 of them. They're easy once you get it down. It just takes a little bit to get it down here. Okay. So for example, let's say an individual buys some sort of a product. The company receives the payment, and both the individual and the company gain from the market transaction. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it. Okay. So privately, the individual's happy because they got whatever product it is. The company gains the profits, so they're happy, right? However, let's assume that in the production process, pollution was created, and pollution is bad. So the pollution then reduces the well-being of those not involved in the transaction. Okay. For example, let's suppose you run out and get a new cell phone, right? You're all happy. You got your new cell phone, right? And the company is all happy because they sold you the cell phone, but your old cell phone is still working, right? And so now you've just created this waste in nature from the badness from our old cell phones, right? Well, you're not actually incurring any of that cost of the waste directly. Everyone else is incurring a bigger cost for you buying that cell phone than we are. That's what an externality is. The pollution that it creates is what we would call a negative. And the idea is, okay, we said that in the production process. So it was actually the production of it that caused the problem, not your buying whatever product this is. It was the production of it. So this one would be what we call a negative because people are getting hurt. Production externality. Okay. It's negative because people are getting hurt. It's production because it's the production of the process. The production process is causing the problem, and it's externality because others are being hurt from that. This would be a negative production externality. Now, externalities are a type of market failure because it means we're not actually producing at the true socially desirable point. We're really not producing at the socially optimal quantity or the allocated efficient. We're not producing where price equals marginal cost. And I know up until this point, even when we went back to monopoly, we're always talking about, oh, that intersection of supply and demand, price equals marginal cost. That's the allocated efficient point. Yay, us. In reality, that's because we ignore externalities. But in reality, externalities exist, right? And so what we got to do is we got to take those into consideration. Now, other market failures, we've seen this course all semester long. In fact, that's what this course is all about. It's about market failures. It's not being perfect, not being a perfect competition, not being where price equals marginal cost. Is anytime you have a floor or ceiling, anytime you have a tax or a subsidy. Now, I won't say anytime. If you are at the allocated efficient point and we tax or subsidize something, because then if a little bit, well, we're actually going to tax and subsidize to get to the allocated efficient point. So if you're at the point where price equals marginal cost, and then you put a tax on something or a subsidy on something, and this would have to be per unit. Whenever you put a per unit tax or per unit subsidy on something, it moves you away from that allocated efficient point. That's going to create a market failure. Quantity controls, monopolies, monopolist competition, oligopoly, and monopsony. These are all market failures. They're all situations where you're not producing where price equals marginal cost. Okay. And monopsony, you're not really producing, you're hiring the correct amount of workers, which means you're no longer, you're not hiring the perfect competitive number of workers. So that's going to create a situation where you're not at the socially optimal quantity. So how do externalities work? And the bottom line is, again, if we're in a situation where marginal social cost is equal to marginal social benefit, you are at the socially optimal quantity. And so there is no externalities. In the presence of externalities, rational agents respond to private costs and benefits and not to external costs and benefits. So this is a situation where there's society, marginal social costs is equal to marginal social benefit. So society is happy, but this is not where the market would actually be. All right. Again, they can either be negative or positive, and they can arise because of production or consumption. So you can have a negative production externality, negative consumption externality, positive production externality, positive consumption externality. And I'm going to give you examples of all four of these, and I'm going to draw four of them. You on the AP exam could be asked to draw any one of the four. I can tell you on the GAVS exam, you could be asked to draw. FRQ, you can be asked to draw any one of these four. You need to be able to draw all four, and I'm going to show you how to do it here. Okay, so example, let's go with the negative ones first. Negative externalities occur when a third party that's not involved in the market transaction incur an external cost. That's why it's a negative externality. It's negative because there's a cost associated with it. Negative production externality, it occurs because of the production of something. And the example I gave a few minutes ago, pollution. Okay, pollution, it hurts other people, that's negative, right? And it's the production of the product that causes it, that makes it a negative production externality. Negative consumption externality. Let's suppose next year you're in a dorm room, you're at college, you're a senior, you're in college, and you're trying to go to sleep. It's 11:30 at night, you got a big test this morning or the next morning or whatever, and you've studied and you're ready to go to sleep. You go to sleep, and your next door neighbor is playing loud music. In fact, and everybody around there is hearing this really, really loud music. Okay. It's the consumption of that loud music that's bothering you. And it's bothering you, so it's a negative consumption externality. Now, they would have to be very, very clear in this. I was on the test development committee, and we struggled over externality questions because you pretty much have to use the word consumption or production. We pretty much have to say the consumption of the loud music. Well, as soon as they say consumption of the loud music, we now know it's a consumption externality, right? And the loud music, when everybody bothers it, no, you don't enjoy it, so it'd be a negative consumption externality, right? Now, what if your neighbors, it's the middle of the afternoon, and your neighbor's playing songs that you like? Then that would actually be a positive consumption externality. So, and I'll come to those in a few minutes. So positive externalities occur when a third party not involved in the transaction occurs an external benefit. You actually gain from that. For example, a positive production externality, you go out, your parents or you go out and you spend a lot of time on your lawn, making your lawn look so beautiful, and everybody drives by, they go, oh my goodness, what a beautiful lawn. Well, in the production of that lawn, you're the one that's producing the pretty lawn. In the production of that lawn, you're actually making your neighbor's house look better too. Because if your neighbor's trying to sell their house and you've got this beautiful lawn, everybody's going, "Ooh, I want to live next door to that person because they've got such a beautiful lawn, and I'll have a beautiful lawn too," right? And so that's a positive production externality. Your neighbors are being helped by your beautiful lawn that you are producing. They're not giving you money for it. You're doing it yourself. It's a market transaction. You're buying all the crap that goes into it, right? Okay, positive consumption externality. I always use flu shots as an example. I always tell my students, please, please, please go out and get a flu shot. Because if they get the flu shot, they won't get the flu. And I hate needles, so I'm not going to get a flu shot. And if I don't get a flu shot, but you do, then I'm not going to get the flu because I'm around you all the time. And so by you getting the flu shot, you're involved in that market transaction. You're buying the flu shot. The doctor wins, you win, right? But I also win because I don't get the flu because you got the flu shot. That's a positive. I win. Yay. Somebody else, everybody else in society that didn't get the flu gets it. Positive consumption. It was the consumption of the flu shot by you that keeps me from getting sick. Positive consumption externality. Let's draw. All right. So bottom line is a negative externality. You're going to have our good old friend dead weight loss back. Dead weight loss occurs because we're either overproducing, it's production externality, or over consuming. The bottom line is there's too much being produced or consumed of this product. Okay, society does not want as much as they're producing. So that would be a negative externality. Negative externalities is, bottom line, when you hear the word negative externality, there is too much of this product. Okay, we want less of it. We want less of it. All right, first one I'm going to draw is a negative production externality. If you follow this routine, anytime you get an externality question, you will get these right. Okay, so practice drawing these. Follow the routine, you got it down. Okay, so first thing you want to do is you want to assume there's no externality. So I'm going to draw good old supply and demand. When you draw good old supply and demand, that's going to give you the quantity and that's going to give you the price. So left alone, this is where the market would be. Okay, and this is what we've been doing all semester long. But now I'm telling you it's an externality. Okay, as soon as I tell you it's an externality, you now have to add another name to each one of these graphs. This now becomes the marginal private, and it's the cost curve. It's the seller. The seller is the one that's bearing the cost of production, and this is going to be marginal private benefit. Okay, because the demand curve is the benefit of the marginal benefit curve. So what we now have here is we're now telling you this is a negative production externality. This supply curve is the marginal private cost. The demand curve is the marginal private benefit. That tells us now that we haven't taken society into consideration. And that's why there's an externality, because we're not considering society. So how do we do this? Well, what you want to do is you say, okay, this is a negative. Do we want more or less negative in the world? We want less negative in the world. So we're going to shift a curve. Which way? We're going to shift a curve that way because we want less negative. It's a production externality. So which one of these two curves is the producer, the supply curve or the demand curve? And the answer is the supply curve is the production curve, right? So we're going to shift this guy. This is actually the marginal social cost. Okay. Now, what I always tell the kids is when you get to this point, one of the things I say, I'm going to hit the wrong button here. Okay. Let me go back here. Okay, what I always tell to do this, okay, this is an externality question. So the first thing you want to do is you want to draw your supply and demand curve, put your marginal private cost, your marginal private benefit. Okay. Now, before you go social, always check your privates. Make sure they're there. Is the marginal private cost there? Yes, it is. The marginal private benefit curve there? Yes, they are. So now you've checked your privates. Now you can go social. And when you go social, you then shift that supply curve to the left, right? And we're going to call this the marginal social cost, right? But you can't be social by yourself, so you need to have a marginal social benefit curve here. The benefit curve, the marginal private benefit curve doesn't shift because this is a production externality. Now what we're saying is this, where the two social curves intersect, is actually the social optimal quantity. So QSO is actually way back here. And the price we want this to be charged for this is right here. That is a negative production externality. The only thing we need to draw now is we need to show our good friend deadweight loss. Okay, deadweight loss occurs because we're producing at Q. Okay, and what's going on here, by the way, is we are actually producing, we're still producing at Q. We're not producing at QSO, we're producing at Q. Society wants us at QSO, but we're not. We're at Q, and so you have this deadweight loss. Always go from where you are. Where are we? We're right here at this big black dot. Where do we want to be? We want to here at this big red dot. And so your deadweight loss is this right here. And notice it's coming in from the right to the left. And the reason why it's coming in from the right and to the left is because we're actually overproducing this product. We want less. Social optimal quantity is less. So you're pointing to the left with this arrow. That's a negative production externality. What I suggest you do is stop this video, start with a clean sheet of paper and see if you can draw this. And if you can't, rewind, rewatch this. Okay, rewatch this part until you can draw it without thinking about it. Okay, what about a negative consumption externality? All right, I'm gonna go through this a little faster now because I want to get through all four of them here. Negative consumption externality, always start with what you know, supply and demand, quantity, price. Left alone, this is where the market will be. Now I'm telling you it's a externality. So as soon as I tell you it's an externality, you've got to put in your marginal private cost. This is a cost curve. You got to put in your marginal private benefit. Okay. Now we want to draw the externality. It's a negative externality, so we want to go that way. Whatever we shift, we're going to go that way. So stop right here. Check your privates. Do you have both marginal private cost and marginal private benefit? Yes, you do. So your privates are good. So now you can go social. Okay. Well, this is a consumption externality. Which one of these curves is the consumer? The marginal private cost and the marginal private benefit? Well, the consumption is the demand curve. So we're going to decrease the demand. Okay, this becomes the marginal social benefit, right? You can't be social by yourself, so this one now becomes the marginal social cost. Where is this market going to, where would we like this market to clear? We would like this market to clear right here at this socially optimal quantity, right? Now, the price is a weird one because in fact, we don't want a low price on this product. Let's say this is cigarettes. We actually want less cigarettes in the world. Okay, most people want less cigarettes in the world, and it's the consumption of the cigarettes that's causing the problem. It's higher insurance rates, the secondhand smoke, all sorts of stuff. It's the consumption. It's not the production of the cigarettes that's causing the problem. It's the consumption of it, not the production. So what we want to do is we actually want cigarettes to be more expensive. And so ideally, what we really want is we want the socially optimal price to be way up here. And that distance, by the way, between these two red dots is the external cost. It's the negative external cost. And so that you want the price to be way up here, not here. Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to show you that the price actually will be up there, but I'm going to show you why in a few minutes when the government gets involved in this externality. Okay, so this is a negative consumption externality. Okay, we shifted the demand curve to the left to get less of it because it's negative. Again, stop, pause, rewind so that you can draw this. Let's get to our positive externalities. Positive externalities occur because, oh, by the way, one thing they might ask you here is how do you know this is a negative production externality? You know it's a negative production externality because the marginal social cost here is greater than the marginal social benefit. Society is um, um, is taking on a bigger cost than the individual. It's social benefit is greater than the marginal private benefit. The society marginal social cost is bigger than the marginal private benefit. Society is its costs are bigger than the individual's costs. Okay, on this one right here, now we know it's a negative consumption externality because the marginal private I got a problem here. Yeah, the marginal private benefit is greater than the marginal social benefit. The individual is gaining more. Marginal private benefit is greater than marginal social benefit. The individual is gaining more than society from this. Okay, and so we've got this externality going on here. You can also look at it right here, and you can actually say the marginal social cost is greater than marginal social benefit. You can also say marginal social cost is greater than marginal social benefit because that's where we are. We're actually at this blue dot right here. So that's what the externality is. The externality is when you have this gap between individual and society. Okay, so let's look at a positive production externality. Positive production externality. Quantity and price, upwards from supply, downwards from demand. Here's where we are. It's an externality, so we got to check our privates. It's going to be marginal private cost. This is marginal private benefit, right? Now, this is a positive externality, so we actually want more of it. So whatever we shift, we're going to shift to the right. Now, you checked your privates. They're both there. You're good to go. Now we can go social. This is a production externality. The supply curve is the producer, so this guy is going to shift to the left. This is going to become your marginal social cost. You can't be social by yourself, so we need marginal social benefit. This is the socially optimal quantity, right? Now, why did we have, oh, by the way, the externality, I'm sorry, the deadweight loss occurs, and the deadweight loss is this triangle from where you are, this right here, to where you want to be, which is right there. So there's your externality. What about the price? Okay, we actually do want the price to be lower, so the socially optimal price is right here. Right? I don't know where I'm going with this. I don't know what I was going to say. I had something in my mind here. All right. What about a positive consumption externality? Positive consumption externality. Here's your quantity. There's your price. upward some supply, downward some demand, and see, it's just follow this routine every time, and you'll get the externality questions right. Okay. In fact, you might want to go and pause the video now before I show it to you. Draw it before I show it to you to see if you can do it. Okay. This is the marginal private cost. This is the marginal private private benefit. So the MPB. Go away. It's the marginal private benefit. Checked our privates. Now we can go social. It's positive, so we want more of it. So whatever we shift, we're going to shift that way. And it's the consumption, so that's going to be the demand curve. So this is the marginal social benefit. You can't be social by yourself. Marginal social cost. There's the social optimal quantity. And this isn't like the other one. Do we want a higher price if it's a positive thing? No, we actually want a lower price on it. So this is actually the socially optimal price that we want on this product. Where's the dead weight loss? Go from where you are, and this one's tricky, go from where you are to where you want to be. So the dead weight loss is actually up here. And that's a tricky one. Students usually miss that one. They want to do this area down here, but it's got a point. The point of that triangle's got to point to the socially optimal quantity. It's got to point to this point right here. All right. So it is a positive consumption externality. Okay, it's a positive consumption externality, and you want more of it. All right. Now, how do we fix this? Externalities. Okay. Externalities can be addressed through either taxes, environmental regulations, or public provision. Tax is just what it sounds like. Okay. It's a negative one, so we wanted less of it, so we tax. We want less of the tax, and specifically what we want is we want it to be a per unit tax. We want to produce or consume less of it. Environmental regulation is EPA, scrubbers, and usually this deals with pollution and that. Public provision is just you won't do it. The government says you're not allowed to do it, so you have to stop. And that would be public provision. Okay. So this would be a negative production externality. And the idea is we're at Q1, we want to be at QSO. So what we do is we target the seller. It's a negative production externality. So we target the seller with either a per unit tax, which causes supply curve to shift to the left, environmental regulation, or a public provision. Make that supply curve shift to the left. And when you do, left alone, the market would be at Q1. So left alone, the market would be at Q1, and you would have that externality because the marginal social cost is greater than the marginal private cost, right? You got a situation where marginal private cost is greater than marginal social cost. I said it backwards. The marginal social cost is greater than marginal private cost. Marginal social cost greater than marginal private cost. Okay. So this point right here, marginal social cost greater than marginal private cost. And so society is bearing a higher cost. So what we do is we put a tax, a per unit tax on the producer, which then shifts their supply curve back and it moves us to the optimal point. The key here is that we were not allocated efficient, and we're trying to make us allocated efficient. And that's what you do with externalities. And you can read all this stuff right here and see what it says and later on, but I'm just kind of talking about it right now to go. All right, what about a negative consumption externality? This one's a tough one because in real life, there aren't a ton of great examples of this, but the best way to do it is a per unit tax at the retail level on the consumer, right? An example of this is actually an excise tax on gasoline. The government actually puts a tax on each unit of gas that you buy. That's what that 99 is. It's $2.89. Now, the $2.89 for a gallon of gas is not the actual price of gas. The price of gas is actually much less than that because there is a tax on that gas. Now, you're the ones actually paying it. You give it to the producer or to the seller of the product, and then they turn around and give it to the government. So in actuality, what's going on here is when they put that tax on that product, This is the $2.89 up here. The actual price we pay for that product is way up here. The true price of that should be, like say $2.50. Let's say if there's a 39-cent tax on this thing. So the price is not the 250 down here. The socio-optimal price is actually 289. We're putting a higher price on it. The government takes that tax revenue. The tax revenue would be this area right here. The government takes that tax revenue and they apply it to what they want to. The idea being between a tax on gasoline is they use it to maintain the roads and that sort of stuff. But it could also be just to make us buy less gas. When the price is higher, you're gonna maybe drive less, and that's going to reduce the pollution. So if it's the consumption of the gasoline, it's not the production of the gasoline that's causing pollution, it's our driving. And so the government could just raise the tax on it. When they do that, it would reduce our driving, which eliminates some or all the electricity. If they raise it high enough, it could actually bring us back to the socially optimal quantity. Right? Positive externalities are through subsidies, again, per unit subsidies, environmental regulation, or public provision. Example here is that we got a positive production externality. We want more produced. So we give a per unit subsidy, which is going to cause in this case, you're giving it to the producer because the production externality, which has caused the supply curve to shift to the right. When the supply curve shifts to the right, you got a situation where before the marginal private benefit was greater than the marginal social cost, right? And so you're going to shift that supply curve to the right. You're going to shift that supply curve to the right, which is going to have us produce more. And this is exactly what they did with the COVID vaccines. They gave the drug companies a per unit subsidy. They subsidized them for each unit they produced, and that ended up causing the supply curve to shift to the right, and we got more COVID vaccines, and that eliminated that externality, and we moved towards the socially optimal quantity. All right. What about a positive consumption externality? Again, you're going to put a per unit subsidy or a tax break. You have to pay less taxes. It's kind of how they would have to do this. There's not really they're not really going to subsidize you. The government's not going to hand you money every time you buy a product, but they give you a tax break for buying it. For a while there, they were doing that with electric vehicles, efficient, energy efficient, air conditioning units, energy efficient air conditioning units, things like that. And what that does is that causes the demand for those products to shift to the right. And so those demand curves shifts to the right. When the demand curve shifts to the right, we go from Q1 to the socially optimal quantity, right? And so that increased demand is actually going to raise the price of that product, which is the socially optimal price. But really, the social optimal, and I actually should have drawn this differently. The social optimal price, the price we want, is actually down here. It's just the difference between the PSO and this, we'll call this the P2. The difference between PSO and P2 right here is the benefit, the subsidy, the subsidy the government gives. So the price we actually pay is PSO, but the market price is way up here at P2. So the market price gets driven up from P1 to P2. That's the price that's being paid at the, let's say I buy an energy efficient car or an electric car, that the P2 is the price I'm paying for that car, but then the government gives me the distance between P2 and PSO in the form of subsidy. So really the price I pay I get is PSO after the subsidy. So the per unit subsidy. Okay, so that is, what did I do? Oh, positive consumption externality. I have no idea why I have this on here twice. So I'm gonna skip it. All right. In summary, they can be either negative, they can be positive, they can be because of production, they can be consumption. And the goal is to address the externality and eliminate either the negative externality by getting less of the product or by eliminating the positive externality by getting more of the product. And that's the idea behind externalities. Something goes along with this, just a very, very seldomly tested, but let me cover it, something called the Coase theorem. The Coase theorem says the government does not need to get involved in an externality if property ownership is clearly defined. In other words, it is mine. Let's say I have a lake and I'm polluting that lake and nobody around me is being hurt. except for every once in a while you like to come and fish on my lake. You're fishing on my lake with my permission, and all the fish are dying. Okay, the government needs to get involved in that because it's my lake. I don't have to let you involved in it at all. It doesn't matter if the fish are dying. It's not affecting anybody else but you and me or anybody else that would come and fish that, with my permission. So the government not get involved in that. Second one is if there's a small number of people, if there's not many people involved in it, if it doesn't affect a bunch of people, then the government doesn't need to get involved in it. They need to get involved in things when they're bigger numbers. And then the other one is when bargaining costs are small. Let's suppose that I'm polluting that lake and you come to me and say, listen, I want to pay you to fish, but I'm not going to pay you unless you stop polluting. Well, if I can get enough money from you and others to cover the cost of the pollution that I was polluting, then I would use that money that you're giving me to go towards my profits and use the money for cleanup and make sure that I don't pollute. Okay. And so if we can negotiate costs, if they're small enough that we can negotiate it, then the government doesn't need to get involved in that. And that's all called the Coase theorem. Again, probably it may be a multiple choice every couple of years, but for the most part, not there. Um, Interesting enough with externalities and in real life here, you can actually have a market for external rights. And brings up a lot of really cool things. Again, probably not something that's going to be tested on the AP exam so much, but still something that's really cool. Let's suppose that we've got these factories. And factory one, this is how much pollution they produce. And factory two, this is how much of that pollution they produce. And factory three, they produce way up here. That's the pollution they produce. Factory four is way down here. And let's say factory five is right here. Okay, so there's 5 factories, and that's the amount of pollution they have. So we're going to measure it over here. This is the axis over here on the left is the amount of pollution, right? This amount of pollution they have. And the government wants to reduce pollution. So what they could do is they could come in here and say, hey, listen, this is how much pollution we want. Okay, let's throw another factory in here real quick. I'm gonna do this like this. That's how much pollution we want. Let's do another factory, and let's have them pollute maybe to right here. Okay, so they're underneath that. So basically what you've got is you got factory one here. Okay, factory one is here, and they're above the pollution thing. So what we would do is we'd put a per unit tax on them. Factory two is actually, wow, the way I drew it, factory two is actually way down here. I'll put that back there. Okay, factory two is, let's see if I can shoot. I'm drawing these too fast. Okay, let me draw it carefully. Factory two is actually way down here. So factory two is this. That's a little old two down here. They're not polluting at all. In fact, they're way below what they're allowed to pollute. Okay, and we'll come back to them in just a minute. Factory three, oh my goodness, they're way up here. They're really polluting a lot. Factory four is right here. Factory five is above the line, and factory six is below. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, so what the government could do here in this case is say, no, you're not allowed to pollute above that line. If you do, you're going to pay a fine. But what they could then do is they could allow what we call the ability to sell the rights. And factory two here could sell this much pollution to factory three. Factory three could buy those rights, and therefore factory three can claim that I'm here. Factory two can claim that I'm also here because I sold my pollution rights. Factory four right here could sell this to these guys, and factory six could sell this to these guys. And then what you end up getting is everybody's on the line, right? Everybody is on the line. Everybody is okay. Nobody has to pay any kind of fines or expenses like that. And people go, wait, that's stupid. Why would they do that? Here's why. Because if you do all that, let me erase all this now. If you do all that, look at factory one. Does it have an incentive to lower its pollution? And the answer is yes, because it's having to buy pollution rights from factory four. Factory one, company one, is giving money to company four. And they don't want to do that because that's part of their profits, right? So they have an incentive to try to lower their pollution. What about factory two? Does factory two have an incentive to raise its pollution? No, it doesn't, because it's selling this amount to, in this case, to factory three. And so it actually has an incentive to try to lower its pollution more, because the less pollution it has, the more it can sell. Factory three wants to go down. Factory four wants to go down so it can sell more. Factory five wants to go down so you can get closer to that line or get away with that line. And factory six. So everybody now has an incentive to reduce their pollution. And what they found is everybody does. The polluters lower it because they don't want to pay, and the non-polluters lower it because they want to sell more of their rights. And what that ends up doing is it ends up actually lowering. So you'll end up getting pollution lower than the minimum. And then the government can lower the minimum or the maximum pollution. They can lower the maximum pollution, which then helps everybody. Okay. It's kind of like how do you save the elephants from going extinct? You allow the poachers to own the elephants. If the poachers own the elephants, the people, because that's who was killing all the elephants, it wasn't big game hunters from the United States going in there. It was poachers. It was people that live in that area. So what they found is they give the people in that area where the elephants are rights to the elephants. They say, these are your elephants. If you want to go out and kill them all today, go for it. Right? Well, they discovered that they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to kill them all. Instead, what they did is they started selling the rights for others to come in and hunt. And they started protecting the elephants themselves. And they protect the elephants. The only one that could kill elephants was either them or people. And they found they could make more money by selling the rights for others to kill them. They maintain a population, the correct population of elephants. And in fact, what they're finding now is the population elephants are growing, because it's beneficial to have more elephants for the people who own them. Okay, that's a positive externality there. So I'm out of time. I'm going to cover the rest of this next week. Next week will be a shorter session, and then at the end of that, or at the beginning of it, I'll do a question and answer. And then after that, I'll finish this unit here. Won't take me the whole time. It is 5:57, and I don't have time to start this next unit, so I'm going to call it a day. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'm going to go ahead and shut off my video and shut off my audio and call it a night.